briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Guang Cong.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Council on the implementation of Resolution 2046, which addresses outstanding bilateral issues between Sudan and South Sudan, as well as the situation in South Kordofan and the Blue Nile states. The bilateral relationship between Sudan and South Sudan remains deeply affected by the war that started in April 2023 between the Sudanese Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces. In particular, the conflicts in Sudan continues to impact the security situation in South Sudan, with cross-border movements of arms groups on both sides, increasing the insecurity in and around the border area. The conflicts in Sudan and the deterioration of security are also compounding the already dire economic situation in South Sudan by affecting its primary source of revenue. South Sudan's oil flow and exports through Sudan have experienced significant disruptions, resulting in a 24.5% contraction of its economy. Only after increased bilateral engagement and new arrangements to improve security along the pipeline route and other installations, oil production and transportation resumed early this year. However, subsequent attacks by the ISF on oil installations, notably drone strikes on few depots storing South Sudan's crude in Port Sudan on 5 to 6 May, and another attack on 26 August on oil facilities in High Lake near the Sudan and South Sudan border, resulted in oil spills, environmental damage, and led to an emergency shutdown of operations. In the meantime, both Sudan and South Sudan continued to engage in efforts to secure oil infrastructure and improve the bilateral economic situation. From 4th to 6 October, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Sudan visited Port Sudan, where he held meetings with the chair of the Transitional Sovereign Council, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and other senior Sudanese officials. The visit led to a series of bilateral agreements aimed at protecting oil facilities and the pipeline installations, the establishment of a joint economic committee, the designation of free trade zone at Port Sudan for South Sudan, and increased cooperation in trade, investment, infrastructure, and security. Both sides reaffirmed their commitment to regular political consultations and regional cooperation. These efforts mark a renewed bilateral commitment to stabilization and cooperation. Mr. President, bilateral engagement between Sudan and South Sudan on the final status of RBA has been at a low point since the start of the war in Sudan. South Sudan's internal political challenges have further complicated this impasse. Since 2017, the RBA Joint Oversight Committee has not convened, and since January 2023, meetings of the Joint Political and the security mechanism between the two countries have remained suspended. The Sudan conflict continues to exacerbate the already dire humanitarian situation in Abyei. About 41,000 displaced people from Sudan have entered Abyei since the start of the Sudan war, placing immense pressure on already limited water, food, health care, shelter, and other humanitarian resources. Families live in overcrowded conditions, with some households accommodating multiple displaced families. Communities are unable to start agricultural activities due to displacements and insecurity. The war in Sudan also increased the pressure on the meat market with an influx of internally displaced persons and people from Kordofan converging around the Amit area, combined with rural populations relocating to major towns due to conflicts and flooding. This has led to a significant population surge in the Abyei area. The war in Sudan is also affecting the security situation in Abyei. I note with concern that the growing presence and activities of the ISF in northern Abyei violates the 2011 Agreement on Interim Arrangements and the applicable Security Council resolutions on Abyei. Similarly, the South Sudanese People's Defense Forces have increased their presence in southern Abyei, breaching the same agreement and resolutions. These military activities in and around Abyei have significantly impeded the operations of UNISFA. Although Abyei has enjoyed a relative period of calm in terms of inter-communal conflicts between the Ngok and Twitch Dinka, as well as between the Ngok Dinka and the Misraya, recent clashes between the SSPDF and the SPLAIO and increased attacks by armed new elements on local communities have heightened insecurity in the region. Both the Misraya and the Ngok Dinka communities share growing frustrations over the years of political uncertainty and the perceived inaction of both governments regarding the future of Abyei. Against this backdrop, and in a welcome renewed efforts to advance the Abyei political process, President Salva Kiir Mayandi reconstituted the South Sudan Abyei High-Level Committee last month. In my meeting with the committee on 27th October in Addis Ababa, I expressed my full support for all efforts to improve the situation in Abyei and address its final status, while commending the stabilizing role of UNISFA. The committee urged full deployment of the United Nations Police Force and expressed hope that international partners would renew their diplomatic efforts regarding Abyei's final status. Similarly, the Sudanese Minister of Foreign Affairs in our meeting on 20th October welcomed the reconstitution of South Sudan's Abyei Committee and assured that the Sudanese government intends to resume the joint bilateral meeting on Abyei. He also emphasized the Sudan's commitment to enhanced bilateral cooperation with South Sudan to address shared security challenges. With both South Sudan and the Sudan expressing willingness to revive the political process regarding RBA's future, I look forward to supporting the African Union-led process in line with the communique of the 1108 session of the Peace and Security Council that reiterated the need to accelerate the implementation of the 2011 Agreement on Temporary Security and Administrative Arrangements for the Abyei area, and to resume the bilateral political dialogue on Abyei's final status. Mr. President, the civilians living in the two areas, particularly in South Kordofan, continue to be affected by the Sudan war, and the overall Kordofan region, alongside the Darfur, has become the epicenter of the battle between SAF and ISAF. The local population is facing increasing insecurity with intensified fighting, including drone strikes in several locations, most recently in the capital city of Kadugli, the town of Dilin, and in the Dalame area. The announcements in February of an alliance between the Sudan People's Liberation Movement's North, led by Abdulaziz Ahilu and the RSF, as well as the subsequent constitution of joint parallel institutions, further fragilized South Kordofan and Blue Nile. This shift in the conflicts highlights the deep divide between the Sudan's center and its so-called peripheries. These significant developments is a strong indication that the settlement of the situation in South Kordofan and Blue Nile cannot be separated from a national political dialogue and new institutional arrangements redefining the relationship between the center of power and the populations and territories that consider themselves excluded. Mediation efforts should provide an opportunity to address the long-standing status of South Kordofan and Blue Nile, which were initially part of the 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreement. In this regard, I will continue to provide support to the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Sudan, as well as the efforts of African Union and Intergovernmental Authority on Development and other partners seeking to end the war in Sudan and to initiate a political process that should include South Kordofan and Blue Nile states fully. I will also continue to engage with the governments of Sudan and South Sudan on further improving their bilateral relations and on ameliorating the current situation in Abyei. In addition, I will continue to provide my full support to the African Union and IGAD in their efforts to resolve the final status of Abyei. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Song for his briefing. I'll now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statement.